Hey guys, Taki here. Another new device arrived at my doorstep the other day, and I have just as many questions as I did 1 month ago when I reviewed the model that came before this one. And while I have some answers to my original questions, I have plenty more. Why does this thing exist? Who decided to switch from cloning a Powkiddy handheld to an Ambernic one? And is this better than the new thing that it clones? One thing's for sure though, with a very aggressive base price like the model that came before this is positioned to be a sleeper hit. That is, if they can manage to keep it on the shelves this time. Starting out with the unboxing experience, it's basically the same as it was last time, but we do have a couple of things that are instilling confidence right off the bat. Inside the package, we have a gamepad, 9 major, whatever that is, at least 1 chip, and a TF card. This time around, we have different options. We have transparent black, transparent purple, white, and orange. Inside the box itself, we have the device, a manual that labels this as R36S Plus, a USB cable, and a screen protector. And here's the new R36S. We have a ton of stuff that I want to cover in this video, but let's start by going over the price and the specs of this model. When it comes to the pricing, this thing sells for around $50 depending on which platform you buy it from. And I have to mention here that this is the US price. If you live in a country that has VAT tax, then you will not see this price in your region. This was a bigger issue than it probably should have been in my last video, so I just want to stress right now, $50 is the price for the US. If you live in another country that has VAT tax, the unit price and the shipping price get added together, and then VAT tax gets added on to both of those. So you will not get this for $50. But at $50, this is a great deal for this hardware, just like it was for the last device. This time around, there's been a slight change to our specs. We still have the same CPU and the same GPU, but we now have 1 GB of DDR3L RAM. Everything else is the same. We're going to do a direct comparison between both of these devices, but I wanted to start off by talking about what happened and why we are here now, as far as I know. As you probably already know, the R35S came out around a month ago and I did a video on it. What would essentially happen is a company would list this on AliExpress, and then another company that sells a comparable device would go and file an IP violation against that due to design infringement. The platform would then take a while to decide in the favor of the other company, and then the listing would be taken down. And this whack-a-mole game kept going on and on and on. So maybe this was always inevitable, but I think it got sped up a lot because this one can't be sold. The reason why this thing looks so similar to that other device that was claiming IP violation is an entirely other story that I don't even fully understand at this point. As best as I know, the original company that makes the PCB for that other device ended up making some minor modifications to it, and then they sold that modified PCB for anyone to buy. Another company came around and bought that PCB and then designed a shell around it. But there's only so many changes they can do when the PCB is basically the exact same thing as the device that it's cloning. So you end up with something like the R35S that looks really similar to the device that came before it because the design was dictated by the motherboard. Now, the company that filed those design violations was in the right to do that because they do own the design patent, and they're not the only company that has ever done that. That same thing has been done to them before for other handhelds that they made that look similar to other companies. The shady part about all of it is that their PCB manufacturer just decided to resell their board to their competitors to put them into that situation to begin with. Now, this is the point of the story where you need to throw caution to the wind and abandon any critical thinking skills that you might have. You sold one device that got whack-a-mole to death by another company that filed design violations against you, so you went ahead and redid your PCB and your mold to copy another company's device. Now, the good thing this time around is there seem to be a lot more differences than there were for the first one, but it just seems strange that this is where they would come to after trying to solve the problem that they had with their first device. Let's quickly do an overview of the R36S. This time around, we have the D-pad and the ABXY buttons on the top, but these seem to be the exact same parts as on the previous model, and that even goes down to the conductive rubber, and we'll talk about that later. In the center, we have a mono speaker, and underneath that, we have our 3 buttons. There's a function button that does absolutely nothing on this, just like on the last device, and we have select and start with an LED light in the middle. On the bottom of the device, we have 2 analog sticks that are centered with the top controls, and these have L3 and R3 functionality. On the left side of the R36S, we have a power button, a reset button, and our second SD card slot for ROMs. And on the right side, we have volume controls and the SD card that holds the operating system. There is nothing on the top, but on the bottom, we do have two USB Type-C ports and a headphone jack in the middle. You'll also notice that we have speaker grills here, and this might lead you to believe that we have two speakers, but we don't, and I don't really know why they kept this when they did this new mold. The back has one of the bigger changes in this new redesign. We can now change out the battery that comes with this. If I lift up this little lid, you can see that we have a battery here, and if I move it, you can see that we could easily take this out and put in a replacement if we needed to. The best part about this is you can buy batteries with a connector already on, or you can just wire up one yourself, and then you will never have to worry about having a paperweight device. For example, here's a smaller battery for the Miyu Mini, and it has the same connector. If we plug this in and put it into the slot, we should be able to power on the unit. And there you go. So that's pretty cool to see. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to tailor back our expectations for this new model because we're able to see the build date for this PCB through this clear shell. A build date this early predates any coverage on the R35S, so we can almost be sure that none of the feedback that people gave on the R35S made it into this one. And that is a bit unfortunate. That means anything that people wish was better on this is almost certainly going to be the same on the R36S. The final change that we have is actually with the glass that goes over our screen. You might be able to see it with the way that the light is catching the top of this, but we have a 2.5D glass on the R36S, and it does look nicer than the original one, in my opinion. It doesn't do anything to improve performance, but it does look good. Now, the unfortunate thing about the R36S is it still has the same conductive rubber that was used on the R35S, and the micro switches on the back appear to be the same ones that were used on the R35S. That means that you're going to be applying more pressure to get input on the face buttons, and you'll also have to deal with louder buttons on the back when you use your shoulder buttons. Those are still louder than I would have liked them to be. When it comes to the face buttons, there is something that we can do to DIY this to be a bit better, and we'll talk about that later in the video when we do a teardown. As I mentioned earlier, this is running on ArcOS, and the difference between last time and this time is this is now an officially supported device, and we're going to update this device in just a bit, but I want to go over what we have here. As you can see with the 64GB card that came with my device, I have 15,000 games. Some of those might be repeats, but you will have a ton of games when you buy the $50 package. This doesn't really matter to me because I ended up replacing a lot of the games that came with my device on the R35S video that I did, and I anticipate that I'll do the same thing with this one. But we can just go through here and see that we do have a lot of games for each system available to us, and if we go into these systems, some of them will have box art like Game Boy for example, but others have not been scraped at all. That's a bit unfortunate because this board doesn't come with Wi-Fi on the PCB, so the only way to get these is if you were to download them on a PC or you were to use a USB dongle. Finding a game to play is also super easy. All you need to do is navigate to a system that you want to play, press A to browse the collection, find a game from the list that you are interested in playing, and then press A again to boot it up. Then you're ready to enjoy your game. You can change these bindings to anything that you want, but when you want to exit out of the game that you're playing, all you have to do is press start and select 2 times and you'll go back to the main menu. Now, if you don't like the theme that's applied by default, you can go ahead and go into the UI settings menu, and then under theme, you'll see that there are a lot of different options to choose from. Find one from the list that you like, select it, and then back out for it to update. But I think now it's time to take a look at the update process. And as you can see here, this is a very old build of ArcOS. It's from last year, and there are newer versions available now. You have 2 ways that you can update this device, and the easiest one is to just head over to your computer and do the update. If you have a USB Type-C Wi-Fi adapter, you'd be able to go to the options menu, and then go down to Wi-Fi, enable the Wi-Fi and connect to your Wi-Fi, and then go to the update option to update your device without having to use a PC. I don't know how many people are going to already have those lying around, so we're going to go to the faster and cheaper option, which is to just use the PC method. I'm going to power off the device and take out my 16GB card and then insert it into my PC. We're going to head over to the ArcOS GitHub page and click on the Wiki subpage. There, we will find an RG351MP image from September of this year that is compatible with the R35S. Then, we just need to flash that over to our SD card. After the flashing process is done, we need to delete 6 files that can be found on the boot partition. Then we're just going to copy over a bunch of files from the stock SD card. And that's it. After you finish copying over all of those files, you should be able to boot up your device, and you'll know everything is working if you see this screen with R36S. If you press start and you go down, you'll see that we are on a September 29th build date. Now we do have one problem that we need to fix, but it's an easier one. You'll see that we don't have any ROMs listed here. Go into the options section and then go to advanced and then go all the way to the bottom and you're going to select this option that says switch to SD2 for ROMs. Now you have access to everything again. I wasn't originally planning to do a performance section for this video since I already have content on this for the R35S, but I didn't want to direct people to that video when I could just grab new footage on the R36S. In this first part of the emulation section, I have all of the handheld systems that came with my stock SD card up to PSP. This includes Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, DS, Game Gear, and PSP. Just as a note, I did find that the analog stick was mapped incorrectly for PSP. If you also have this issue, just go into the controls and remove all of the mappings for the analog stick and redo them. For our next section, I have grouped all of the arcade systems with all of the lower end home consoles. This includes CPS 1 through 3, Neo Geo, NES, Genesis, and Super Nintendo.
Now!
We have 3 systems left for this emulation section, and the first is PS1 with the enhanced resolution option turned on.
Round 1. Fight!
Dreamcast is our next section, and if you want to get the best performance possible, you need to go into the emulator options and select Retro Run or Retro Run 32. That will make a lot of Dreamcast games run much better than using normal Flycast.
Hang on right. I know. Don't worry. Whoa! Yo, Cabby! Move it! Move it! No problem.
Get ready. Fire!
Our last system is Nintendo 64, and we also need to manually select a different emulator to get the best performance possible. Head back into the menu and select Standalone Rice from the list. There are a ton of N64 games included with the 64GB SD card, so this is the biggest section of this video, and I included games that run well as those that don't, so you can get a better idea of what this hardware can do.
Thunderwave! Oop!
So just like we did in the last one, here's a comparison with our new PCB versus the RGB20S. And as you can see, they started with this and they ended up with this. There are a couple of unfortunate things about this new clone revision. As you can see, the component for the shoulder buttons looks to be the same, but the ones on the RGB20S are very soft compared to the much louder ones on the R36S. But while we're here, let's start talking about some modifications that you can do to the other controls. One of the easier mods to do on this to improve the feeling of the buttons is to come over here and break this connection that joins two of the buttons together. This makes it so that way when you press one of the buttons, you won't end up pushing down on more than one at the same time, making the feeling of the button slightly worse. These two buttons over here were already broken, so I don't need to change anything for those. I'm just going to come over here and cut this connector. And now we have that problem solved. The next thing that I want to talk about is the conductive rubber. On the left side, we have the R36S conductive rubber, and on the right, we have the RGB20S. And even without taking any measurements, you can judge the difference in the stiffness based on the opacity of the conductive rubber pad. This one is a lot softer than the one that they went with in the R36S. There isn't a whole lot that you can do to fix the stock pads beyond just trying to cut off some of the rubber from the top of this dome. But there might be a better and cheaper method to fix this. This is kind of random, but I found that the conductive rubber pad of a Game Boy Color matches up with the contact pads of the R36. The only problem is the conductive rubber isn't thick enough. As you can see, if I measure the top of the dome to the bottom of the conductive rubber pad, it's only 2 millimeters. On the stock pad, that is 2.7 millimeters. So what I want to do is just add some material to the top of this dome to help space it out a bit more to see if that can fix the control issues on this device, or to make the controls feel better. Alright, I think I got to the best possible outcome with the least amount of effort. For the ABXY buttons, cutting that connection was enough to just make them feel significantly better than stock. Those buttons are way harder to press than the individual buttons now are on the modified R36S. And that just leaves us with the D-pad. I modified it with the Game Boy Color conductive rubber pad and some electrical tape to increase the height, but it didn't feel that good. So I found an even easier solution that improves the feeling significantly. All you need to do is come over here and loosen this screw until the D-pad feels better. So in my case, just a couple of turns. Go and test the button. Still a little stiff. Loosen it a bit more. Test it out again. And now I have a D-pad that feels a lot better than it did before. Way better than the one in the R35S. So there you go. You can easily DIY this to mitigate the only downside of this entire cheap device. I want to wrap up this video with my closing thoughts on the R36S. I think this thing is a much better handheld than the R35S was, and at the price that this is going for, it has basically no competition on the market. It's got that same great screen, the ergonomics are much better than they were on the R35S, and if you modify the controls like I did, you can eliminate the only shortcoming of this device. If you have R35S, I don't think it's worth upgrading to this, but if you don't have either device, then this is the only one that I would recommend. It's a really good starting handheld and it beats out anything else in the $50 price range. But to answer one of the questions that I had at the beginning of the video, it's not as good as the RG353V, but it's not that far off. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see another, take a look at a video that I did on the XU10. That's another device in this form factor with better controls. Happy gaming, everyone. Taki out.